This is our second session. I just started recording. And so last time we kind of went over a broad picture of the family, and you told me about your maternal line and your paternal line, and we went over some simple or little stories and things that you had. And I guess my first question would be if there's anything in particular that has come up for you that you feel you would like to talk about. And I have some other questions if you have anything. Just before we get too far away from anything, if something's on the tip of your tongue.
Not really, Ben. Why don't you query me, and if
All right.
Anecdotal comes up, I'll certainly.
Sure. So, well, when were you and Granny married?
We were married on June the 23rd in 1957.
So 2 years before my dad was born.
That's exactly right.
And where did you live when you were first married?
Granny was still a sophomore. I guess she was going into her second part of her sophomore year when we met in 1956, and we married in 1957 after her junior year. And because it was a women's college, I couldn't live in the dorm, so we got an apartment in Bryn Mawr, less than a mile away from school. And so Granny either drove to school or walked to school, or I took her to school. So she finished her senior year as a commuting student. It worked very, very well. And I decided, and I had continually taken courses at either Temple University or University of Pennsylvania. So I continued to do that, and I took some courses at Penn in anthropology and in history of art, and I think a Shakespeare course at Temple. Anyhow, I was continuing to do that because Granny was an ardent student and really worked at it. We spent a lot of time in the library at Bryn Mawr College. Of course, it was right there. And actually, Granny worked in the library, helping. So that year was a very exciting year, and we continued to live there after Granny graduated from Bryn Mawr. And then she became pregnant with your dad, and we decided that we really liked living on that side of Philadelphia called the Main Line. The Main Line got its name because the Pennsylvania Railroad had a suburban commuting route that went from Philly up to Paoli, where we finally lived when your dad was born. And it's known as the Main Line. And we moved there into a lovely house with an acre of land. And I continued my work. We were manufacturing shoes, and I had a factory. I think I told you about the factory last time we spoke, and how amazed people were when we were making these very intricate upper parts of the shoes, and everybody was fascinated with that. Anyhow, we lived there very happily, and then Mindy was born a year and a half later, December 31st in 1960. And we just had a lovely life. I started my business then with a retail shoe store in Wayne, Pennsylvania, maybe 3 miles away from where we lived. Did I tell you the story about getting a loan? Did I mention that to you?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Well, I had been working for my father in his business, which was had been started in around 1900 after my grandparents moved to the United States, and my father was born after that business had been started. And so it was in the footwear, leather industry, and everything that was related to that. And I was fascinated with the retail shoe business. I had worked for my dad in some of the retail shoe stores and became a buyer of the men's footwear and then some of the women's footwear and so forth. And so it was something that I really liked. And there was a location in Wayne, Pennsylvania, and I opened this very small retail store. That was the beginning of my career on my own. And so that grew, and then I got involved in importing footwear directly from Italy at that time. And that
How old were you at that point?
in 1960, I was 29. I was born in 1931.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to a bank because I didn't want to go to my parents, who would very gladly have given me anything I wanted, but I wanted to be independent. I had saved some money to start the business. So I went to this little bank in Berwyn, which is the town or 2 towns down from Paoli where we lived. And in 1960, things were very different from what they are today in the financial areas. So I walked into this little bank because I had heard from somebody that they were a good bank to deal with. So I walked in, and there was this very short man sitting at the front desk, smoking a stogie and talking to a couple of other men there. So he said, what do you want, kid? I was very young looking. I had to give my driver's license when I went to a bar or any place that served liquor until I was 40, I think. So I said, well, I'd like to speak with the president of the bank or the loan officer. He says, well, what are you looking for? I'd like to go into a business that I have a plan for, and I'd like to borrow money. He said, oh, yeah, well, you go upstairs and you can see the president. So I walked up the steps, and this guy followed me. He opened the door for me. There's nobody in the room, in the desk. He walked around, sat down. He said, I'm the president. What do you want? So I asked for $15,000 in a loan. He said, wow, that's a lot of money. How are you going to pay it back? And I said, well, I have this and that as equity. And well, you look like a pretty nice kid. Okay, you got it. So that was the funding for the retail shoe business that I started. Of course, my father had a wholesale business with an enormous inventory of footwear. And as I said, my parents would give me anything that I wanted because of experiences that I had, having been hurt by a child and being spoiled my whole life. So I started that business, and it was successful. And after about a year or so in this small retail space off the beaten path, Granny went into the town of Wayne, and she saw a for rent store in a very good location and told me, and I made a deal and went into that store. And so that was the beginning of my expansion into the retail shoe business. And then I opened a store in Wayne and one in Ardmore suburbs of Philly, and one in Philadelphia on the University of Pennsylvania's campus. And I continued to import business footwear from Italy, as I told you, Italy, then Spain, then Central and South America, and then finally into Asia, China. And so that's the business experience. And it was lots of fun. It wasn't so trying. I was fortunate to be doing this in an era where it was easy to expand businesses. And it was just lots of fun and very enjoyable. So I maintained that continued interest in business. And then when I gave up the retail business, I decided that I would not only do footwear and leather products, but expand. And then when I went to Italy, and not to Italy, I'm sorry, to China, it was because of a delegation that I had met, because I was doing some work for the federal government for the Department of Commerce. Had I told you about this before?
I don't think so, no.
Yeah. There was a department in the Department of Commerce, a section in the Department of Commerce that made small loans, I think up to 3 or 5, I think it was $3 million, which in 1980 was a lot of money for companies that had been hurt by importers, by people like me, having been an importer. And it was in the leather industry and also in the fabric clothing industry. And I, along with, I think there were 5 other, they were all men, 5 other men who were doing similar work, assessing the requests for loans up to, I think it was $5 million, for companies that made application for those loans. And then we assessed the companies. We did research on their backgrounds, their financial reputations, and to see whether or not we felt that they would benefit from the loans that were made to them, whether it's $1 million or 2 or 3, whatever it was, so that they could pay back the government and have success with the continuing business of their domestic business. And so that was terribly interesting. And that's really how I met a delegation of people from China to become interested in going to China. And that occurred because the man who was the head of that department, I forget his first name, his last name was Cooper. And he said that a delegation was coming from the province of Yunnan, which in the very southern eastern part of China, right on the other side of Burma. During the Second World War, I don't know if you know the history or not, there was a group of the Air Force called the Flying Tigers, and they flew what was called over the hump, big mountains on the other side of Yunnan province was Burma. So they would fly over, and that was called flying the hump. And the Flying Tigers would come in and do whatever damage they could to whoever, I guess it was the Japanese. And so in Yunnan, there was this delegation of about 10 people, and they wanted to build a shoe factory. They had a tannery, and were seeking information. So because of my background, this Mr. Cooper decided that I would be the one who would speak with this group, which was very interesting. We had meetings for about a week. They showed me some photographs, and I gave them some information and documentation about how they could go about and have success with a shoe factory. And that went along very well. And after that week or 10 days, they went back. And 6 months later, I got a telex. In those days, telexing was the way of Zooming without photo or voice. And so they asked me if I would please come over to China to help them set up a shoe factory. They would appreciate it. And so since I was a child, I was also always fascinated with China. There's a museum at the University of Pennsylvania. It used to be called the Commercial Museum of Philadelphia, and they have a collection of Chinese antiquities and history that, as a young child, I was fascinated. The grammar school kids would often, not continually go, but one class or one school or another would go and see this wonderful presentation, and they were propaganda films about Chiang Kai-shek. And so as a 9-year-old child, I was there and was fascinated, and still am. That then became part of the University of Pennsylvania's museum. So in the back of my mind, going to China was fascinating, and I grasped the opportunity. So they sent me tickets and this and that, and I went over there. And what I saw was the 15th century. I really was taken back to a time that you couldn't believe. It was so primitive. The manner in which they were making footwear was so much, to my amazement, that it was hard to believe. Instead of the modern manner of making patterns, they had chalk with paper, and they would draw the chalk pattern on the leather and cut them with scissors, or even in those days, automation for footwear making was, a million years forward from the method that they were using. It was fascinating. It was a challenge, and I was also familiar with importing. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, if you want to get started in the United States, I'll give you a shoe design, and if you'll manufacture that, I'll attempt to sell them in the United States. So that was the beginning of that. So I gave them a design to copy. There's a brand called Hush Puppies. You've heard of that brand? Well, they had a classic design, very simple shoe made out of suede, pigskin suede. Pigskin is really the leather to use in China, or was at that time before they became sophisticated and had tanneries of their own. But they had tanneries of almost only pigskin that they were using. Pigs, of course, are in abundance over there, and so that was the leather. They did not have bovine animals to any major degree where they could tan that leather. So I was exporting bovine leather in a pre-tanned condition called wet blue. It's a process that has to be finished when they get that. So we were sending many containers of that after I had gotten started, a couple of years after I had gotten started in Yunnan province. And so we helped them build a factory there, because they were, the footwear was horrible. It was not saleable in the West. But little by little, they improved, and I expanded my travels there and expanded my business interest, not only from leather and footwear to other commodities. And that's how the career started in China.
Cool.
Which was fascinating and really wonderful. And I love the Chinese people. It's how I became friendly with Lei. You remember meeting Lei?
I think so, yeah.
Lei Lu, the violinist, who's now the assistant concertmeister of the Florida Symphony.
Yes, I think I do
And
remember.
he came, I helped him come to the United States. He was a 20-year-old, maybe not quite 20 when I met him in, I think, 1980. Finally, in 1985, he came over, had a scholarship to the University of, to Temple University's Boyer Graduate School of Music. He, I met him because his sister, who's a couple of years younger, was probably 15 or 16 when I met her. When I was first there, she worked as a clerk in what was called the Friendship Store. Friendship stores were all over China. They were the only retail outlets where foreign visitors could spend money. And you could not spend your own money. You could not give dollars or francs or pounds or rubles to the store. You had to buy script money. I forget what it was called, but it was like monopoly money, small dollars or the amounts of the script. I think they were called dollars, script dollars, I'm pretty sure. And so you would trade in your foreign currency for the script, and then you could spend that script because they didn't have an infrastructure for like a treasury, U.S. Treasury like we have. And so that evolved and evolved quickly, as obviously after 40 years, you see what China has become and will become even more dominant in the world, I predict. And not only I'm not that brilliant, but it was pretty easy to see from my vantage point how China was going to grow and become the power that they are today, and will become even more powerful in the future, I predict, much more powerful.
Well,
So that's how I got involved, and then many more commodities, whether it was fabrics or other items that people wanted. I would be called or contacted by people I didn't know. There had been a TV program. Did I tell you about that? The Four Americans in China.
no, I don't think so.
Yeah, I was in Yunnan. I think it was 1983, if I'm not mistaken. I was there checking into a hotel, and with Raymond Chan. Raymond was the young man, now your father's age, who was my translator and helper and dear friend, and he still is a dear friend. Your parents met Raymond and his wife. His name is Shadow, a given name. A gorgeous woman, very beautiful woman. Was the secretary in the office that Raymond worked in when I first went over there. Where was I?
This was in Yunnan?
Yeah, so I was telling you about the film Four Americans in China. So I was checking into the hotel there, and a woman walked up to me and said, I heard you speaking, and it sounds like you're an American. I said, yes, I am. She said, my name is Paula Haller. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I really have been frustrated because I had a businessman who was going to do one section of this documentary that I'm doing, and I've done 2/3 of it with a student here and a American student who's studying here, and a young woman who is teaching here, married a Chinese man, and Victoria, can't think of her last name right now, was the New York Times editor in China at the time. And I need an American businessman. Would you like to be in a documentary film? How long are you going to be here in Yunnan, in Kunming is the capital city? I said, well, I'll probably be here for 4 or 5 days. I said, well, perfect. And so I got involved in this, and I became the businessman, one of the 4 Americans in China. That was shown on PBS, I guess it was, and KQED is the station the channel, I guess, out of California in San Francisco. That did actually this woman worked this documentary for them, and then it was shown in 1985, I guess is when it was shown. It was very exciting, a lot of fun. And I have, because your dad had done it for me, Ben, what are the big cassettes that you put in the machine? Huh?
Yes. The VHS recorder.
Well, I think we have enough of one to have it transferred into a disc or whatever the most modern technology is. We have to get that done because it was fascinating.
Yeah.
what I had experienced, and so wherever I dropped the tail to go back to that, I don't recall. But I continued to work in China, traveled the entire country, and as much of the country that was commercial. You've heard of the city Shenzhen, possibly. When I first went there in the early 80s, I think there was a population of maybe 40,000 people. It was a village. Today it has 25 million people in it, and they just spread it out, take over the land and the farms as they expand their cities, which has been the pattern of how they've grown. It was a fascinating experience. I just am thrilled with the history that I have had in China, the friendships that I made, and of course, the culmination to me was the development of the relationship that we have with Lei and Chao Ying.
Mm-hmm.
Chao Ying came over here also to Temple. She was a harpist, an extraordinary harpist, and we happened to have a relationship, a friendly relationship with the woman who was the major harpist for the Philadelphia Orchestra, Marilyn Costello is her name. She unfortunately is no longer alive. But we knew her through Granddad's, Granny's father, a relationship that he had. And so we met her, and being a harpist of renown, I introduced Chao Ying to Marilyn, and Marilyn was just blown away with the talent that she had. And so she gave her private lessons at no cost. Wow. As Chao Ying was going to Boyer School of Music at Temple to get her degree, her master's degree. So that was another fascinating part of the relationship. And they're two very talented people. I can't say that I feel about them as though they're additional children to Polly and me, Granny and me. But I'm very, very close to them. And your dad, Ben, particularly understands the importance of these two people in our lives. And he really does know how important it is to me and to Granny that there be continuity with the relationship with Lei, the violinist, and Chao Ying, his wife, who no longer plays the harp. It was just too difficult lugging that thing around for small concerts or weddings and that sort of thing. But she was fascinating and a marvelous player. We've heard her when they lived in Philadelphia after they had graduated from Temple's graduate school. So we've become very, very close. If I don't call Lei every Sunday, he calls me. Mostly he calls me. We have a very, very close relationship, almost like a son, or surely like an uncle to a nephew. It's been an extraordinarily special privilege for me to know this young man and his family. His sister also came over here, the young woman who introduced me to him. Did I tell you about how I was introduced to the family last time?
Not here. You haven't. Maybe in the past.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it was about 1980, something like that, early 80s, and I had been purchasing various trinkets and things to bring back home from the Friendship stores, which was the only place where you could spend money. You could not, at that time in history, go into a retail store. It was prohibited for any foreigners to go in and purchase anything. So if, out of curiosity, I or any other foreign visitor would go into a retail store, you would be stared at like you were from outer space, and you could never purchase anything. They would not allow, they were not allowed to sell anything. So you only got stuff from the Friendship stores. And so I went to this young woman. It was also in the city of Chengdu in Sichuan province, where the food is very, very spicy. Mm-hmm. My favorite food in China, where Lei was born and grew up. And his sister was this young kid working in the store. And after frequent visits and always going to her because she was kind of cute and spoke a little bit of English and was very friendly and very pleasant, she's the one who gave me my Chinese name, Jin Young Shin, and which has a very nice meaning. So I guess shortly after we became acquainted, one day she asked if I would please come to her home for dinner to meet her parents. I had no idea she had brothers or sisters. Actually, Lei is her only sibling. And you were prohibited in those days. Foreign visitors were prohibited from visiting homes. You were really not allowed to. You could get into big trouble if you were caught going into a Chinese home.
Wow.
So I spoke to Raymond Chan. Chan Chi Kong is his real name. Raymond's his given name. He's from Hong Kong. His English is perfect. I said, what do you think? It's really an exciting opportunity to go to a Chinese home. And this young woman is just lovely. He said, well, we're not allowed to do it, but why not take this opportunity? It would be fascinating. So we did. We followed Liu Bei. Liu is the family name. Bei is her given name. Liu Lei is the violinist. Liu is the family name. Lei is his given name. It's now in the United States Lei Liu or Bei Liu because last name comes last. Family name comes last. So we followed Lei in dusk. I guess it was the equivalent of maybe 5 blocks from the hotel where she worked and where we were staying to their home. It was a little compound. So we followed her walking at dusk, maybe 20 paces behind her. And people, as we walked along the way, stared at us, thinking, I'm sure in their minds, what is this foreigner doing here, walking in our neighborhood at this time of day or evening? And so we got to the home. It was a very beautiful, although tiny by standards, home. I'd say it was 500 square feet. maybe 7, but no more than 700 square feet. A nice little living room that you walked into with a table where they ate, a small kitchen off of it, and 2 bedrooms. And I forget whether they had a bathroom or an outback. So we sat down to the table. We were greeted very warmly by the parents. The father, who was my age, died a number of years ago, about 6 or 7 years ago, was a musician. He taught violin. And at that time, he was he was given the responsibility to teach 2 to 5-year-old students violin. The mother, who's still alive, and I still see her when she comes to the United States, has a wonderful life, incidentally, and we can go into that situation a little bit later because I think it's fascinating in that many people think that there are so many restrictions on the Chinese people, and there are, and they have face recognition on everybody. So it is a 1984 type of home, with Big Brother watching you.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I got to the home, and very modest but clean. As the saying goes, you could eat off the floor. And the table was set up with oranges, cigarettes, of course, everybody smoked. When I got to China, I was never a heavy smoker, but I stopped smoking after that because it could kill you, all of that smoke. And peanuts and beer and other goodies lined up for Raymond and me to have as welcoming gifts. And then we began to chat. Raymond, of course, was bilingual, more than that even, and he spoke the dialect as well as they were able to speak Mandarin, which was the language of choice that they communicated. And so it was easy understanding. Nobody except Raymond and the little sister spoke English, and her English was not terrific, but it was good enough. We could understand one another. So we had a delightful time and exchanging stories about our family histories and how I got there and so forth. And they said, we have now a welcoming gift for you. I said, well, these are all welcoming gifts. No, this is something special. So sat back, and in came a little 5-year-old girl, adorable child. And she played on the violin a Vivaldi sonata for about 20 minutes, I guess, impeccably, with no emotion on her face. It was just as straight as it could be and serious. And after that, the applause, and she left. She was a niece, and she wound up being in the Vienna Orchestra in the first violin section. This little kid, that was my introduction, my gift, which was absolutely, it was spellbinding. It was so exciting and beautiful. And then I was, shortly after that, were allowed to go to Chinese homes, and we were welcomed there. And so whenever I was in Chengdu, I would go there and visit. Raymond was almost always, if not always, with me. And so was Bei Lu. And so I had an easy way of communicating with the parents. And so how did I meet Lei? I had no idea that Bei had a sibling. So as I was leaving that evening, the first introductory evening that I had with the family, her father asked me if I ever went to Beijing. I said, yes, I go every trip, because in those early days of my experience, things were very centralized. The provinces did not have autonomy. They could not do the bureaucratic nonsense by themselves, everything until it really changed, and it did shortly after that. The departments with which you were working had overseeing out of Beijing. So I had to go to Beijing. I told the father that I was going to Beijing however many days after that initial visit to their home. He said, well, would you be kind enough to take a package for us to our son? We have a son who lives in Beijing, so I'll be happy to. What does he do? Well, he plays in the first violin section of the Beijing Ballet Orchestra, which is the second most important, and still is, classical orchestra in China. The Chinese symphony is the first one, and the Beijing Orchestra is the second most popular and most renowned. And so I said I would, and when I got to Beijing, Raymond called Lei, and he came for dinner. He was 20 years old, I guess, and very young. I think he was 19, actually. Unsophisticated, open, easy to talk to young man. Although he didn't speak English, he could say yes, no, hello, and goodbye. That was his English language capability at that time. Raymond, fortunately, was the interpreter, and we had dinner the first night. We had dinner together, and he was just charming, and you could see that he was a sweet young man, unsophisticated, with no airs about anything. And so I asked him how he had gotten the position with the Beijing Ballet Orchestra. He said, well, there's a competition in all of the provinces in China to go to the college, conservatory is what it is. In Beijing, the conservatory is sought after by any musician with any instrument or voice, so that they could further their education. So the competition, as he had told me, was approximately 1,000 violinists for one seat in the class.
Wow.
It may have been more than one seat, but as I recall, it was one seat. And he won that competition, which is how he got to the conservatory. And after the conservatory, he had trials for the Beijing Ballet Orchestra. And as it happened, he won the seat, and he played in the first violin section. And he had met a student who was a harpist called Guy Xiaoying, who he ultimately married. And that's another story, how we found out about their being married. So after 5 years of meeting, and then I invited him back the next night because he was so charming. And I asked him to bring a cassette, because cassettes were the thing at that day, rather than discs or anything else.
Yeah. And
he brought a tape. I said, well, I'd like to play it, and I'd like to take it to somebody in Philadelphia. I know someone at the Curtis School of Music, which is a very, very famous school of music where students up to the age of 16 can be admitted. Well, Lei was 20 years old. So when I got back after that second very, very lovely evening, and I did leave for back home from Beijing rather than going on with travels, it was the end of my stay at that time. I went to Curtis, and I met with a gentleman who was the head of Curtis at that time. His name is John Delancey. He was an oboist, and he was very famous. He's also famous in the Kleinbard family. Kleinbard is Granny's maiden name, because Granny's mother, who was an extraordinary artist, painted a portrait of John Delancey, which we have hanging. And I'll walk in and I'll show it to you in our home. And I have a fun story about that too. So here's John Delancey.
Oh yeah, I know that one.
Yeah, painted by Mindel Kleinbard, Granny's mother. And he was the head of Curtis. So I went there and I spoke to John and I told him about my experience with Lay, and he said, well, let me hear the disc. So I played the disc, and yeah, no, it's incredible. It's beautiful. However, he said, I'm an oboist, as you know. And so my ear is really more focused on that sound. But I'll tell you what, there's a woman who's the head of the string instruments at Temple's Boyer School of Music, Graduate School of Music, whose name is Helen Qualwasser. And I'm going to call her and tell her that I've heard this disc, this cassette, and I think it's worthy of her listening to. So he called her there with me there. And she said, well, send him up. And so I went up to Temple University, and she was very pleasant. It'd been a bit strained and stiff, but very pleasant. And so she took the cassette and she played it, and she closed her eyes. She put her hands up and said, I must teach this violinist. Is it a boy or a girl, a man or a woman? So I told her the story, and that was the beginning of her initiation of getting Lay to Temple. And so on September the 9th in 1985, Lay finally came to the United States and started his career at Temple. And we became pretty friendly with Helen, and she told me that he was the finest student that she had ever had.
Wow.
And they became very friendly. She died, I guess, 3 or 4 years ago, and when Lay came up here, we visited with her. She was a wonderful, wonderful woman and a mentor for Lay, and so he's an extraordinary guy in many ways. Not only the talent of being able to play the violin in the quality that he plays, but he's also the most renowned teacher, violin teacher in Florida. And he teaches at Tampa, not Temple, but at Tampa University. And he has private students, and he's extremely well thought of. And not only by me and our family, but by people who know him. He also conducts a student orchestra. And that happened, I'm guessing 10 years ago. And we used to visit. Granny and I would go down to Florida and stay on the West Coast, not far from Tampa, and of course would visit with them. And I went more often than Granny did. I sometimes went down there for business purposes, so I would stay an extra day or two to stay with them. So one day he was asked if he would lead a group of juniors and seniors in high school and be the conductor to a group. And he asked me, I'm sure he asked other people's advice who were more professional in that area. So I said, look, if it's something that you think is challenging, that you ought to attempt to do it. It's another area of music that you'll probably enjoy. And he did take on that challenge. So after the first season, they had a final program, and he told me about it. And I don't think Granny, she didn't come that time. She couldn't come down for whatever the reason. She was teaching, of course, and it was in May, and it was the end of the school year, so Granny was busy. But I went down there, and so it was his first concert in after a season, the first final concert, and so he was very pleased that I could come. And I was sitting on the balcony with Chow Ying, who was filming this event. And he came out and they did the program, and there was great applause. And he was asked by the director of this program for students. He was introduced in a rather formal way, and so the person asked Lay if he would be willing to take questions from the audience, and he said that he would, because they wanted to know about his history. He said, but before I am asked any questions, I would like to tell you that, more or less this is what he said, which brought tears to my eyes. He said, I'm here because I had the very good fortune of meeting somebody when I was much younger, and this gentleman was traveling in China, blah, blah, blah. So he gave a little history of how we met. And they had sat me in the balcony in a particular spot so that a spotlight could shine on me. And he said, and that gentleman, I'm happy to say, is here today to experience this. And they had a floodlight on me. And, it was really, and sorry about that.
No
And
problem.
I became very tearful. I mean, it was one of the highlights of my life to have that kind of praise from somebody who I really love this young man. And it was just an extraordinary experience. So our relationship is solid. He's part of our family. And as I said, I told your dad that Lay is someone you have to have continuity with when Granny and I get off the train.
Well, I'm sure he'll watch this and remember it well.
Oh, I know he knows it well anyhow. Lay played the violin at their wedding. And instead he played the wrong part. When they were leaving, he was playing the part that Here Comes the Bride. Only because he didn't know it, but he wanted to participate. He wanted to participate in the wedding. Very exciting, that relationship. So does that end this episode?
That is pretty good. Maybe I can pick your brain on a couple dates real quick, and because I have a couple dates that I'm not so sure about. Your father, David Goldstein, was born in 1904, and when did he pass away?
February 2nd. He died in 1989. Is that what you asked, when he died?
Yes.
Yeah. June the 30th, 1989.
Yeah, so 85?
89.
Yeah, 85 years old. It's like,
no, he was He was 89 when he died. 1904.
Oh, did I go to his funeral then? It would have been because if it was in
You were there, yeah. You were.
yeah, so it would have been like 93 maybe.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it was. He was 89 years old. You were there in your father's arms.
And his father, Morris, what were his dates?
He was 65 years old when he died, and he died in 1941, before my 10th birthday.
Mm.
He died of cancer. He was a very heavy smoker.
Mm.
Did I tell you anything about him?
Not a lot. We talked some. I have some notes, but yeah, I think we mostly talked about your father.
Yeah.
Yeah, we learned about him studying the Talmud and going to synagogue every day, and which is one of the things I was going to ask you about is to the extent that that your father was religious or spiritual, coming from a man who was clearly interested in those things. And other than the fact you talked about when you had your brush with death, that he had a really potent experience of spirituality there and praying to God for your sake. Were there other things in your childhood that were particularly religious, or how he related to that?
Well, my father was deeply religious. Fortunately, from his point of view, didn't have the same faith that he had. So, I'm a non-believer. I cannot explain things the way religious people like to believe, but it's still a mystery to me how we came about it, other than the scientific knowledge that we have with regards to the evolution of the earth and how we came to be and are. Mm-hmm. The earth existed for many, 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 many millions of years prior to human existence. So it's not been something that was believable to me, the Bible stories. And to me, they're nice stories, but they're just stories, and why people are so incredibly into it and have such faith in the truth as they see it is astounding to me.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah. Well, that's probably something we can pull into a little bit more next time. And
absolutely.
I think that's pretty good. Oh, one last thing. Your mother's name.
Yes, her name is Tilly, Tilli, mm-hmm. And her middle name was Yolanda, and Sandberg, I think you know that, is her maiden name.
And what were her dates?
July the 11th, 1906, and I'm trying to think of the date. I was in Massachusetts at the time. It was the winter. I have to double check on that, Ben.
No worries.
I'm sorry, I can't pull it up right now.
It's a very specific fact. So,
yeah.
Cool. Well, we can come back to that next time.
Yeah.
This was really great. I think we covered some good ground.
Good.
I had no idea you had spent so much time in China and had connections. I had no idea. So was really happy to learn.
Yeah, it was a fascinating career. I really cherished the opportunities that I've had and the relationships that I've developed. It was quite extraordinary. My next trip, if I make one, will be my 96th trip to China. So,
Wow,
Wow.
that's impressive.
Wow.
yeah. Yeah, I was hoping to make 100 trips, but
That's
right now,
ambitious.
right now I'm grounded here very happily.
Well, maybe they'll invent teleporters in the next year.
Yeah, I'll beam over, Scotty.
Yeah, exactly.
I love you too.
Yeah.